In the early 1960s, the world was living under the shadow of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were competing in everything, but the greatest competition was in space. After the Soviets stunned the world by launching the first satellite and then sending the first human to space, America felt it was falling behind in this fateful race. As a result, NASA turned into a restless beehive, with thousands of scientists and engineers working day and night to achieve an accomplishment that would restore the United States standing. But far from the newspaper headlines and camera lenses, there were 3 women working quietly inside NASA. No one expected that their contribution would become one of the most important reasons that helped America make history. The first of them was Katherine Johnson, a mathematician with a rare talent for understanding numbers and solving the most complex equations. Alongside her worked Dorothy Vaughan, an intelligent woman who led a team of employees, despite not holding the official position she deserved. The third was Mary Jackson, who had a great passion for engineering and dreamed of becoming an engineer. At a time when society had placed endless barriers in front of women, especially black women, inside NASA, life was completely different from what people imagined. Even within one of the most advanced scientific institutions in the world, segregation laws still existed. Black employees worked in separate sections with designated eating areas and restrooms, as if they lived in 2 different worlds within the same building. One morning, the engineering team faces a complex mathematical problem related to calculating the spacecraft's trajectory. The officials search for the best person in the mathematics department to help, and the choice falls on Katherine Johnson. She moves to a new building full of engineers and officers, but from the very first moment she feels unwelcome. Everyone looks at her with astonishment. She is not only the only woman on the team, but also the only black person. One of the employees places stacks of files and complex equations in front of her, as if trying to test her or perhaps embarrass her. But Katherine begins studying the numbers calmly and confidently, quickly proving that her presence was no accident, but because she truly was the best. The team leader sits before a board full of equations, then asks her to review the numbers quickly. Some of those present think she'll need hours to understand the data, but the surprise is that she begins discovering small errors no one had noticed before. Everyone falls silent for a moment. Then some engineers start looking at her with respect, while others feel jealous, as she has proven within a short time that she is no less capable than anyone else. Katherine's responsibilities grow heavier day by day. She begins working on the most sensitive calculations inside NASA, where every number she writes could determine the success or failure of the mission. Yet she is still treated as an outsider. But the bigger problem remained the same: the bathroom. Every time she needed to use one, she had to leave the building and run a long distance in the sun or rain, simply because the nearest bathroom had a sign barring her from entering. One day, the sky was pouring rain. Katherine ran as usual and returned to the office after a long time, her clothes soaked with water. The team director looked at her angrily and said, in front of everyone, that her repeated disappearances were affecting the workflow, and asked her loudly where she went every day. Silence fell over the room. Katherine stood for a moment, then could no longer hold back what was inside her. She spoke in a voice full of pain, explaining that she didn't have a nearby bathroom like the rest of the employees, and that she had to walk a long distance every day simply because of the color of her skin. Her manager was genuinely shocked. He then walked out of the office, toward the bathroom marked "Whites Only." He grabbed a hammer and struck the sign until it fell to the ground, then declared that NASA would know this kind of discrimination no more. Inside NASA, the clock was ticking closer to the moment of the historic mission's launch, and there was no longer any room for error, because the entire world was watching what the United States would do. The countdown began for the most important space mission in U.S. history up to that point. Astronaut. John Glenn was preparing to board the spacecraft that would carry him into orbit. While thousands of NASA employees worked without pause, everyone understood that any mistake, no matter how small, could turn the dream into a tragedy. Inside Mission Control, screens displayed hundreds of numbers and data points every second. Engineering teams reviewed the engines, communications experts tested the equipment, while the mathematics team recalculated the flight trajectory again and again to make sure the spacecraft would reach orbit and return safely to Earth. On the morning of the launch, tension was visible on everyone's faces. John Glenn arrived at the launch pad and put on his spacesuit, while the media broadcast the event live to millions of viewers. But moments before the final go-ahead for liftoff, something unexpected happened. John Glenn asked the officials not to rely on the computer's results alone, saying he wanted Katherine Johnson to check the calculations herself. To him, Katherine's precision was the true guarantee of the mission's safety. The request quickly reached Katherine, who sat down with the papers and began reviewing every equation and every number. Everyone waited in silence, because the fate of the mission had become tied to the result she would announce. The minutes passed very slowly. Then she finished her review. She raised her head, looked at the officials with confidence, and confirmed that the calculations were correct, and that the spacecraft could launch safely. Then the rocket engines ignited, the ground shook under the immense thrust, and the spacecraft gradually rose into the sky. While everyone watched in silence mixed with hope and fear, the first signals began arriving from space, confirming that the launch had succeeded and that the spacecraft was following its planned trajectory. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but the joy didn't last long, as the hardest stages of the journey still lay ahead. After the success of John Glenn's mission, many things changed within NASA. No one doubted Katherine Johnson's abilities anymore. She had proven to the world that science knows no color or gender, and that competence is the true measure of success. As the years passed, the truth began to come to light. People discovered that behind the great achievements attributed to famous figures stood minds that had never received the recognition they deserved. In 2015, Katherine Johnson received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States, in recognition of her extraordinary contributions to the space program.